No more expensive foreign vacations on my watch, he said, with that smug little smirk that made you want to staple his tie to the conference table. We're not in the business of sending people to Europe for croissants and compliments. It hit like a slap. A room full of people, most of whom had known me for decades, went silent except for the soft click of someone pretending to type. The director was new, brand new, barely 2 weeks in, and already swinging his MBA around like a toddler with a lightsaber. He didn't know anything about the Berlin licensing trip, but he did know how to weaponize buzzwords and put on a performance. He stood there, pointer in hand, PowerPoint glowing behind him like a halo of corporate mediocrity, calling my annual regulatory visit a luxury junket, while pretending this was just good business. I had personally shaken hands with regulators who kept our entire European operations legal. I'd earned those relationships, earned them with 20 years of clean audits and emergency calls taken at 3 a.m. when some customs officer flagged a shipment because a barcode sticker was slightly off-center. But he didn't want a history lesson. He wanted applause, a culture shift. A rebrand. Okay, I said. One word, that's all I gave him. Not because I agreed, because I knew exactly what was about to happen. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to warn him. I certainly wasn't going to beg to do the job I'd been flawlessly executing for 2 decades. And hey, if you've listened this far and you're one of the 97% just floating by without hitting that subscribe button, do us all a favor and tap it. It's like giving the quiet compliance lady her metaphorical coffee. Keeps the lights on, keeps the chaos at bay. You clicking that thing? It actually does make a difference. Anyway, I canceled the flight. Forwarded the licensing docs to his freshly hired 24-year-old assistant who once asked if VAT was a dating app. I copied the director. Even put a little smiley face next to the sentence, please confirm receipt and track deadlines accordingly. No reply. That's when I knew this man was going to ruin something. Probably everything. And I wasn't going to stop him. He kept the meetings coming, team syncs with color-coded efficiency goals, mandatory innovation workshops with slogans like cut fat, not firepower. Each time, he'd slide in another passive-aggressive jab about how some people in this office got too comfortable with the old ways, followed by a pointed glance in my direction, like I was an expired yogurt container nobody had the guts to throw out. I stopped taking the bait, stopped raising my hand, started documenting. Everything, email chains, meeting recordings, even hallway conversations where he made offhand comments about phasing out travel-heavy roles. It was like watching a toddler try to disarm a nuclear warhead by licking the wires, entertaining if it weren't so dangerous. People started noticing. You okay? They'd ask in the break room. Why didn't you go to Berlin this year? Oh, new management style, I'd say. Stirring my tea. I'm just streamlining. Cutting fat. I even put a sticky note on my monitor with the license renewal date circled in red, purely decorative, of course. I wasn't allowed to touch it anymore. Delegation, remember? But in my bones, I felt it. The quiet ticking of a bomb no one else heard. And when it went off, I was going to be sitting front row with popcorn. I canceled the flight with the same emotion you'd cancel a dentist appointment you secretly looked forward to. Berlin in spring was never a vacation. It was bureaucracy in combat boots, face-to-face meetings with humorless officials who could tank our entire European operation over a missing comma on page 7. But I did it every year because it mattered, because it worked. And now I was apparently streamlining. So I logged into the travel portal, ate the non-refundable fee with a corporate shrug, and drafted a tidy little email to the director's assistant, Taylor, I think her name was. Barely out of undergrad, bright-eyed, permanently armed with a Stanley tumbler and a nervous laugh. Probably thought compliance was a skincare brand. Subject, urgent EU license renewal. Hi Taylor. Per Director Blake's new delegation structure, I'm forwarding all materials for the Berlin license renewal. This includes historical filings, the contact list, required documents, and deadline tracking templates. Please ensure confirmation of receipt and tracking of submission deadlines. Let me know if you have any questions. Best, redacted. I CC'd Blake. Of course I did. He'd asked for transparency. I gave him a damn spotlight. No reply. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever. The email sat there like an unopened birthday card from a forgotten aunt. I could see Taylor had read it. Blessed Gmail read receipts, but that was it. Ghosted. So I did what any veteran would do when the new recruits start juggling live grenades. I backed up everything. Made my own offline archive of the license history, signed letters, scanned contracts, call notes, even those cursed Excel trackers with the color codes no one understood but me. I saved it all onto an encrypted flash drive I kept taped under my desk drawer like a compliance Cold War relic. And then I waited. Blake, meanwhile, was thriving in his own reflection. He strutted through the halls like a guy who'd just discovered pivot tables. He'd replaced all the framed process maps with inspirational posters about velocity and optimization. My personal favorite was the one that said, "Don't cling to legacy, be the disruption," which was ironic, considering the disruption was now dressed in a navy blazer and busy ignoring critical legal filings. I knew the deadline, had it circled 3 times on my personal calendar. June 17th. German regulators didn't send reminders. They didn't nudge, they penalized, and they did it with precision. I added a second calendar alert, and a third, just for me. Because when the house burns down, someone has to remember where the exits used to be. I'll admit there was a quiet grief that settled in my bones that week. A kind of professional mourning. Not just for the death of process, but for the certainty I used to have. That if I did things right, it would matter. That competence would be enough. That someone, somewhere up the food chain, would see. Instead, I had a boss who thought Berlin was a wine tour and tailor, who once asked me what retroactive compliance meant as the new face of international operations. So I leaned into the sarcasm, smiled at meetings, nodded at nonsense, took notes I never intended to share. I became the ghost in the machine, silent, watchful, waiting for the gears to grind down. They would, they always do, especially when the person holding the wrench doesn't know which end is which. It started with whispers by the printer, then a mention in the finance meeting. By the end of the month, it had its own unofficial slide in the quarterly budget deck. Travel cost reductions, Berlin trip eliminated. Bullet pointed beneath it, projected savings, $8,750. 8 grand. That's what 2 decades of operational stability and ironclad licensing compliance was worth now. A bullet point on a spreadsheet some intern probably color-coded to match Blake's tie. I sat through that meeting with the same expression I'd mastered over the years. Polite, present, and mentally somewhere between screaming into a pillow and drinking gin from a coffee mug. Blake stood at the front of the room like a TED talk reject, pacing in his shiny loafers, repeating the word agility like he was trying to manifest it into a sixth sense. And some of our more legacy-based processes have been reviewed and optimized, he said, eyes landing squarely on me with that smirky half-smile. International compliance, for instance. There's no reason to fly across the Atlantic in 2025 just to shake hands and sign papers. We're digitizing, modernizing, cutting the fluff. He didn't say my name, he didn't have to. The implication hit like a paper cut across the dignity. I sat there, spine straight, pen tapping silently against my legal pad. Didn't flinch, didn't blink. But inside, a fuse was quietly burning down. My inbox started filling with congratulatory notes from other departments. Great to see compliance adapting. Excited for this new chapter. The tone was always the same, glad you're still here, but also glad it's not me. So I got to work, not with confrontation, but with documentation. First, I started archiving every single email from Blake and his assistant Taylor. Every directive, every meeting note, every Slack message with a thumbs-up emoji in response to questions that clearly required a full paragraph and a policy number. I created a new folder on my home drive labeled Comms Archive, then renamed it something innocent, Lunch Survey Results. Then I exported the email trail from our Berlin contacts. Just for reference, I told myself, just in case. I pulled old reports, pulled audit logs, pulled screenshots of the submission portals. I even downloaded a copy of the compliance calendar I used to maintain, complete with red alert reminders and contact tiers for each regulator. Blake had deleted that calendar from the shared drive. Didn't matter. Mine was better. He kept up the jabs in staff meetings, called me process-heavy when I asked about the new approval flow, said I was classic compliance when I brought up documentation standards, always with a laugh like he was just joking, but always loud enough that people noticed. I laughed too, because that's what you do when you're being professionally erased. You laugh. You keep your voice even, your emails polite, your documents neat. You become so dangerously composed they forget you're watching them set themselves on fire. Behind the scenes, the timeline grew, week by week. Missed deadlines, unanswered queries, meetings where Taylor nodded and promised to circle back, regulatory memos that no one forwarded. Each one saved, categorized, time-stamped. I didn't tell anyone what I was building. That's the thing about quiet professionals, we don't need permission to prepare for the fallout. We just do it like muscle memory from years of covering everyone else's blind spots. Blake, he was busy schmoozing with executives, talking about lean operations and compliance decentralization. You could practically hear the MBA jargon sloshing around his skull like a shaken snow globe. He thought I was obsolete, and maybe to him I was. But soon, very soon, he'd learn that old school doesn't mean out of touch. It means I remember everything. It was the finance town hall that finally broke the facade. The kind of soulless, windowless Zoom call where no one dares to turn on their camera, lest someone see them gouging their thigh with a dry pen out of sheer boredom. Blake, of course, was front and center, new haircut, tighter shirt, same smug energy radiating through the Wi-Fi. Slide 7. Budget wins Q2 highlights. There it was, in bullet point Helvetica glory. Eliminated international travel redundancies, terminated non-essential European compliance, visits forecasted savings. $42,000 annually beneath that. An icon of a little cartoon airplane with a red X over it, like I'd been joyriding to Oktoberfest on the company dime for 2 decades. Even chuckled as he read it out loud. And let's not forget the infamous Berlin trip, now officially retired. Another chuckle. Turns out digital signatures are cheaper than schnitzel. Laughter from finance. The kind of performative chuckle people give when the boss makes a joke and they're hoping he forgets about the budget line tied to their stapler. I watched in silence from my cube. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone nearby was microwaving fish. It felt like the world had shrunk into a parody of itself, and I was the only one who remembered the script used to have logic. They called him efficient. They called him cost-conscious. They called him a budget hero. What I called him can't be printed on an HR-friendly platform. But I smiled, took another sip of my lukewarm coffee, and moved the digital countdown on my phone one day closer to the deadline. Berlin license, 13 days remaining. Thing about Germany is they don't send reminders. They assume you're competent. If you forget, they fine. If you plead ignorance, they fine harder. There's a kind of brutal elegance to it, like a piano falling in slow motion onto a very expensive car. I stared at that countdown like it was an approaching comet, not with fear, not even with dread, but with a kind of reverence, because I knew exactly what would happen when it hit. And still, I hesitated. I opened a Word doc, drafted the resignation letter. It was short, elegant, and barbed just enough to draw blood without causing a scene. I even formatted it with my favorite serif font, like a farewell love letter to dignity. But I didn't sign it, not yet, because I wanted to see it. The crack. The exact moment when the facade Blake had built, this house of recycled buzzwords and butchered procedures, finally showed its first fracture. So I sat. I waited. I watched. Taylor, bless her ever-distracted heart, was now deep in planning a corporate retreat that involved inflatable obstacle courses and a kombucha tasting station. Compliance hadn't been mentioned in over a week. Not in meetings, not in updates, not in the panicked chatter around Q3 revenue projections. The license, meanwhile, was a silent countdown in my pocket. 11 days. 10. 9. I reread old emails like they were scripture. Blake's original message delegating all responsibility for licensing to Taylor. His streamlined process memo. The finance slide where he publicly celebrated killing the trip. Every word, every bullet point saved in triplicate. I even backed it all up to a fresh USB drive labeled for when it explodes, because it was coming. And when it did, I wasn't going to raise my voice or point fingers or utter the word told you so. No, I was going to sit in the center of that storm like the eye of a hurricane, completely untouched. Because I'd spent 20 years building systems that didn't fail. And Blake had spent 4 months dismantling them with PowerPoints and punchlines. The storm was coming, and I had a front row seat. The subject line was polite, almost charming in its blunt European efficiency. License renewal status. Urgent notice action required by June 17, timestamped 3:42 a.m. our time. German regulators don't care about time zones. They assume if you're doing business on their soil, you'll wake up early enough to keep your paperwork in order. The email went to Taylor. And almost as an afterthought, CC'd me, probably because I was still listed on some legacy contact sheet from years back. One last ghost echo of a time when things actually ran smoothly. I read it over my first cup of coffee. Twice. Everything was there. The renewal link, the updated ID requirements, the reminder about retroactive fines for lapse in certification. Even the little line at the bottom that read, failure to comply by June 17 will result in license deactivation and potential penalties as outlined in Section 4.2 of the Handelsrechtliche Betriebsordnung. I knew what that meant. They weren't bluffing. I opened Slack. Taylor's status, Palm Tree 000 until next Monday. Responding to urgent messages, only lapped a airplane, of course. She was in Costa Rica. Something about a yoga ranch and a no-screens policy. Ironic for someone who was now entirely responsible for keeping our European business legally operational. I stared at the screen. My mouse hovered over the email. I could have forwarded it to Blake. I could have picked up the phone. I could have flagged it, escalated it, even walked into his office and handed him a printed copy wrapped in a bow. But I didn't, because I wasn't authorized anymore. He made that abundantly clear. He had stripped my access to the renewal portal, removed my contact privileges, cut me off from the chain of command. I was a name on a CC line now, a footnote in an operation I built from scratch with handshakes and legalese. So instead, I sat there, took a slow sip of coffee, and opened a new folder on my desktop. Final Archive Berlin. I spent the next 6 hours compiling every scrap of relevant data. Past renewals, correspondence, regulatory guidance, internal documentation. I downloaded everything. Audit logs, old call transcripts, even photos from my last in-person visit with the regulator in Berlin, the one where we shared bad vending machine espresso, and she told me I was the only American who ever read their instructions start to finish. When I finished, I transferred it all to a fresh USB drive. Then another. Encrypted them both. Labeled one company archive. Labeled the other personal insurance. And I put them in separate drawers, locked them up, and went to lunch. No appetite, just motion, just ritual. The email was still unread by 4 p.m. I checked out of habit, then again before I left the office. Taylor was busy posting beach selfies to Instagram, holding a smoothie that looked like it cost more than the license fee itself. One caption read, "When work-life balance hits just right, nail pineapple hash blessed." I didn't comment. Didn't like it. I just made another copy of the archive and walked out into the parking lot like I was carrying a live grenade in my purse. It's funny how silence can feel so deafening when you know what's on the other end of it. A deadline, a system, a freight train with no brakes, and the driver sipping coconut water off grid and oblivious. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat, but a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was just gravity. The laws of consequence beginning their slow descent. And I didn't have to lift a single finger. It was a Thursday morning, overcast. The kind of weather that makes everything in the office feel slightly more fluorescent and depressing than usual. I had just sat down with my chipped floral mug and a bag of Earl Grey when the first message pinged through Slack. Hash in Tops Alert Berlin. Anyone else locked out of the license portal? Says our account is suspended. Need access to finalize customs docs for Q3 shipment. I read it 3 times, each word sinking in like slow-dripped caffeine. I didn't move, didn't flinch. Just gently swirled the tea bag in my cup, watching the cloudy tendrils of bergamot dance like smoke. Blake responded within minutes. Fastest I'd ever seen him react to anything not involving a VP CCing him. Director Blake, probably an IT credential issue. Try clearing cache or submitting a help desk ticket. Loop me if it's still down by EOD. Out, end of day, I almost laughed. The Berlin team pinged again, less polite this time. Berlin, we've tried 3 browsers and 2 networks. It's not a cache issue. The portal says our license number is invalid. Another ping. Berlin, we have 2 shipments flagged by customs. One's perishable. Blake went quiet. Taylor, still OOO, was tagged in desperation. No response. Just the same smiling profile photo of her in front of a jungle waterfall, probably mid-meditation while the EU prepared to strangle our supply chain with red tape and fines. I took a long, unhurried sip of my tea. The license had officially lapsed. The portal locked us out. The German regulatory system, in its usual cold precision, didn't send second chances. No friendly nudges. No grace period. Just a message that your account is now inactive. And the daily fine begins at midnight Berlin time. I opened my inbox and reread the original email from the regulators. June 17 deadline. Today was June 20. That meant the clock had been ticking for 3 full days. Euros 100,000 per day. Euros 300,000 and counting. I glanced across the open floor. Blake was leaning over one of the junior analysts' desks, trying to look casual while clearly panicking beneath the surface. Just an IT hiccup, he muttered loud enough for a few heads to hear. We'll get it sorted. I didn't say a word, didn't offer a suggestion, didn't even look up when he glanced in my direction like I might step in and save him from the fire he'd spent 4 months soaking in gasoline. I had already been replaced, delegated, made obsolete, so I sat back, crossed one leg over the other, and took another sip. Let the silence stretch, let him stew in it. The Berlin office was now offline. Customs agents were flagging shipments. Clients were pinging support about delays, and the little ball of panic rolling downhill had officially grown teeth. Still, no one came to me, not yet. I wasn't sure if it was pride, ignorance, or fear, but Blake wasn't ready to admit anything was truly wrong. Not publicly, not in front of the staff. He thought he still had time. He didn't. Behind my calm face, behind the teacup, behind the still posture in the far right corner of the floor plan, I felt it. That moment, the shift, the exact instant when a mistake stops being an oversight and becomes a consequence. I'd waited months for this. I had the email archive, the calendar screenshots, the delegation note, the receipt confirmations that never came, a full breadcrumb trail leading back to one very avoidable decision made in front of 30 witnesses with a smirk and a clicker. I didn't need revenge. All I needed was a chair, a cup of tea, and time. And today, time was officially on my side. By Friday morning, the dam burst. The Berlin office went dark first, then Hamburg. Then our satellite operation in Warsaw pinged a panicked message into the shared chat. Warsaw, client access suspended. Internal database is locked. Are we under cyber attack? It wasn't cyber anything. It was good old-fashioned bureaucratic death by expiration. Germany had deactivated our operating license. And since our EU framework ran through that single, all-encompassing certificate, every branch tied to it went into lockdown like it was 1942, and someone pulled the blackout blinds. The email came in at 6:13 a.m. I was already at my desk, sipping hot water with lemon because I'd run out of tea bags. It was from our customs broker. Subject, urgent freight held at Port of Hamburg shipment 441B89 flagged due to expired business certification. Required, active license to release freight. Additional penalties accruing. Please advise immediately. That shipment, held at refrigerated port storage, contained a product line with a shelf life. Every hour it sat was another euro bleeding out of our margins. By 9:02 a.m., the company's European CRM dashboard was lit up like a Christmas tree of failure, error messages, client access denials, internal routing failures. Germany's meticulous efficiency had shut the doors, turned off the lights, and was now quietly tallying our incompetence at euros 100,000 a day. And Blake, he was unraveling. It began with the usual scramble, get IT on the line. Call Berlin. Why wasn't I notified? He dragged the entire tech team into a Zoom call. barking about server integrations and backend flags, demanding to know why one little license issue could take down the entire European side of the operation. I watched from the sidelines as our lead sysadmin, bless his heart, calmly explained that the servers were working fine. It was the legal standing that was gone. Like trying to drive a car after the DMV revokes your license and sells your plates. And the blame started rolling downhill. First, Berlin's supposed to manage local compliance. Then, why didn't someone escalate this to me directly? Finally, can someone loop her in? What's her name? She used to handle this stuff. I got the Slack ping from Taylor, who had just returned and sounded like she'd rather still be ziplining through banana trees. Taylor, hey, Director Blake wants to know if you can assist on the licensing issue. Let us know what you need. I didn't even bother responding in chat. I opened Outlook, found the original email thread from March, and hit forward. No message body, no added commentary. Just the subject line and his own words: all future licensing coordination should be handled by my team. Please direct all communication and responsibility to Taylor effective immediately. Thanks. Then I hit send. A few minutes later, I heard Blake's door close hard enough to rattle the ceiling tiles. Someone across the aisle muttered, "Yikes." I didn't move, just sat still, watching my own screen like a courtroom stenographer recording the autopsy of a decision gone bad. The next call that came in wasn't from IT or Berlin. It was from our biggest EU client. They'd been locked out of their platform for 12 hours. Their purchasing team was frozen mid-cycle. Their CFO was threatening to pull 2 contracts and review the third. The sales VP's voice cracked on the call. I stayed muted, just observed, because I wasn't in the meeting. I was only invited, for optics. A silent witness to the pileup that was no longer theoretical. That afternoon, I walked down to the basement storage room and retrieved a manila folder I'd stashed months ago. Inside, printed documentation of the full license trail, audit logs, and timelines, color-coded, bound, tabbed. Blake's signature sat at the top of every delegation memo. I didn't deliver it, just laid it flat on my desk, a totem, a reminder, because revenge wasn't personal anymore. It wasn't fire and fury or shouting matches and slamming doors. It was a checklist, a process, a system executing itself, and now, that system had teeth, and it was hungry. The boardroom was already humming when I walked in. That low, murmuring energy that floats around just before a storm breaks. Executives speaking in clipped half-sentences, someone tapping nervously on a phone, the CFO massaging his temples like that might delay the aneurysm. Then came the sound. Thwap. A letter, creased, manhandled, official, slapped onto the center of the table. The CEO stood at the head like a man holding a live grenade he didn't know how to disarm. This, he said, voice tight, was delivered via courier to my home this morning. Silence. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. He didn't need to. It is a formal notice from the Bundesamt für Wirtschaft, informing us that our European business license lapsed. 3 weeks ago, he paused, eyes scanning the room like a prison warden looking for the first twitch of guilt. The fine, he said, slower now, like the number physically pained him to say, is euros 100,000 per day. Retroactive. Non-negotiable. A spreadsheet printout came next, slid across the table like a death sentence. As of this morning, we owe euros 2.1 million, and counting, plus customs holds, platform outages, breach of contract risks in 3 countries. Our partners in Munich are threatening to sue. Nobody breathed. Then the bomb. Who was responsible for this renewal? He didn't say it gently. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment looking for a name to carve on the plaque. Blake, sitting 2 seats to my left, adjusted his collar like it had suddenly shrunk 3 sizes. I mean the process had been restructured, he said, eyes darting around the table. We delegated. We were streamlining redundant compliance protocols and delegated to whom? The CEO barked. To Taylor's team, Blake said, now visibly sweating. The responsibility was transitioned earlier this year during Q1. It was all documented. I didn't say a word. I just opened my laptop, flipped it toward the center of the table, and slid the timeline across the mahogany like a chess player pushing a final move across the board. On the screen, March 3rd, Blake's email delegating all responsibility. March 4th, forwarded documents and confirmation request to Taylor. May 28th, CC'd on regulator's warning. June 17th, deadline. June 20th, portal deactivated. June 21st, freight held. June 23rd, CRM outages across EU. June 24th, CEO receives formal penalty notice. Every entry had a corresponding document. Every event backed by a receipt. All time-stamped, all signed. I didn't need to say I told you so. The silence said it for me. The kind of silence that lands like a thunderclap, heavy, final, undeniable. The CEO's expression changed. Not immediately, not explosively, but slowly, like a man realizing the thing he thought was an accident was actually a map drawn in advance that everyone else ignored. He turned back to Blake. You signed this, he said flatly, pointing to the delegation memo. Yes, but you signed this, the CEO repeated. You stripped senior compliance of its direct authority. You ignored the calendar. You eliminated travel for a regulatory handshake that literally held up our foreign revenue stream. I assumed you assumed, the CEO cut in, voice low now. More dangerous. You assumed, and now we're bleeding six figures a day because of an assumption. Blake opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Across the table, the general counsel leaned over and whispered something into the CEO's ear. The CEO nodded. Leave your badge with reception, he said, effective immediately. This board will convene again tomorrow to discuss emergency reauthorization strategies and damage control. Blake didn't stand right away, just stared at the laptop screen like it might rewrite itself if he blinked enough times. When he finally did move, it was quiet, mechanical. The shuffle of a man who had just watched his own obituary read aloud in Excel format. I closed the laptop, didn't smile, didn't gloat, just packed it away because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just lands perfectly timed, precisely delivered in complete silence. And in that silence, there's power. Power you don't beg for. Power you earn by being right, by being ready. Blake's office was already half-packed when I passed by. Door cracked open. A cardboard box perched on the edge of his desk like a tombstone. Caught a glimpse of that ugly motivational mug he always bragged about. Innovate or evaporate, wrapped in bubble wrap and irony. No one spoke to him. No pats on the back. No you'll bounce back texts. Just dead air and a few interns avoiding eye contact like he was contagious. HR called it administrative leave pending internal review. Everyone else just called it what it was, the fall. Later that day, the CEO's assistant stopped by my desk. Soft, like she was delivering bad news to a priest. He'd like to speak with you, privately. The walk to the corner office felt surreal. Like I was watching myself from above, each step a closing chapter, each breath heavier than the last. He didn't waste time. Sit, I did. He didn't yell, didn't accuse, just looked tired. The kind of tired that clings to your bones when you're doing math on how much trust, money, and reputation you've lost in a single week. Can't undo what happened, he said, but we can recover with your help. He pushed a folder across the desk. Compensation figures, a retroactive contract, reinstatement, a dotted line promotion, all the things I would have killed for 6 months ago. But now I already knew the answer. I reached into my purse, pulled out a neatly folded envelope and placed it gently on top of the offer letter. My resignation. Signed, dated, notarized, his jaw clenched. Not in anger, in regret. I'm sorry it came to this, he said quietly. I stood. No, I said, you're sorry it cost you. He nodded just once, no defense, no spin. As I reached the door, I paused just for breath, one last look at the office that had become a graveyard of respect. I leaned in, calm, controlled, and whispered, enjoy the vacation from revenue. Then I walked out. No farewell email, no hallway hugs, just the sound of heels on tile, and the building swallowing my silence like a secret it would choke on later. Back at my desk, I grabbed my things, 2 folders, 1 mug, and the USB drive labeled personal insurance. Someone from facilities gave me a soft nod, like I'd just finished chemotherapy and won. Outside, the air was warm and thick with summer. The kind of heat that makes the world feel slower, heavier. At the airport, I didn't book economy. I didn't check my email. I walked straight to first class. Berlin, not for licensing, not for compliance, for me. I sipped champagne 30,000 feet above the mess I left behind and watched the clouds melt below like all the excuses they used to make. Back on the ground, someone in a boardroom would soon realize the fine was now over euros 2.5 million and rising. Someone would finally read the full letter. Someone would panic over the audit trail I'd left behind like breadcrumbs in a burning forest. But I wouldn't be there. I'd be walking cobbled streets, espresso in hand, laughing with a waitress who remembered my name from last year. And maybe, just maybe, thinking how poetic it was that the only thing they ever wanted to cut was the only thing holding the whole damn thing together. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.